You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Let's move on to our next topic and talk about the current state of international cricket, Mike, because the game at an international level is facing many problems, and all countries in the ICC need to try and solve those problems. But too many to list here today, Mike. But just to name a few, inequity and distribution of funds amongst all full member countries of the ICC and associate members. And it's clear to see that India is getting a big slice of the pie, and then you have Australia and England, and then you have all the other countries trying to fight for the crumbs. And then you have the franchise and T20 cricket changing players' priorities and choosing that route because their home countries can't afford to pay them enough. And we see that from many countries around the world where players are choosing that option just to get by. So there's a few problems the game faces at an international level. Also, Mike, I don't know if it's me or you may see this too, but I've always noticed there's always been a reluctance in world cricket to help one another out in the world cricket community. Countries care about their self-interests. You should help each other for the greater good of the game. I think ever since the ICC was created back in 1909, as they were known as the Imperial Cricket Conference, and they changed their name to ICC in 1964. This reluctance has always been there ever since cricket was established, really, especially when the West Indies, India and New Zealand came into the fold and joined Australia, England and South Africa at the time. Australia and England didn't really play them as much and didn't really play much against South Africa either. Australia, an example, it took them until basically 1950, 51, 52 to play against the West Indies in a test match. And it took them until 1945, 46 to play New Zealand in a test match. And being so close to New Zealand, we haven't done much to help New Zealand cricket out over the years either. And then it took them until 1947, 48 to play a test match against India. So you get the idea, you get the picture that we've always had this reluctance to help in world cricket, especially those countries I mentioned, but also as the years progressed, Pakistan, then Sri Lanka, then Zimbabwe, and now Ireland and Afghanistan have joined. So, Mike, how would you assess the state of international cricket, and why do we have this reluctance to help one another out in the cricket community?
It's a good question. The biggest problem now is that there's a devaluation, and I think it's a societal problem to a large degree. And as John Arlott always said, the game is a microcosm of society. Whatever's happening in society is reflected in cricket. And Arlott was right. And the devaluation of what has gone before I think, is a massive issue, not just within the game, but within society. The devaluation of history, or the indifference to history, if not the devaluation, the indifference to what has gone before. We've created a world, or seem to have created a world which moves at such a pace that we don't have time to stop and to consider what has gone before. And I think the devaluation within a cricket context, the devaluation of what's gone before is becoming very, very serious. We've seen now what's happened to the West Indies. The West Indies, they're partly to blame themselves, and it's for many complicated reasons, societal reasons. They are disparate countries that make in the archipelago, which they only come together to play cricket in the name of the West Indies. On every other score, they work as separate entities. So, there are very complex issues around the West Indies. That aside, but yes, there has been an indifference for a long time. You can nearly extend the argument to what I was saying about Australia's attitude to the subcontinent in the 60s and 70s, that how much of this is culturally elitist and how much is racist. That's tough talk. I understand that, and I don't mean to be outrageous, but there's no doubt that the rich first world countries have always prospered, and often it has been at the expense of the developing countries. And the same thing is happening now. Zimbabwe's got such massive economic and political issues that it's very difficult for it to rise above everything, sadly. I've made 2 or 3 tours of Zimbabwe, and it's a wonderful country, hospitable country. It looks very much like Australia, with a number of eucalypts and the desert and one thing or another. It's got a really Australian feel. Be you in Harare or Bulawayo, but there's a desperate sadness there. And this is the other thing, of course, with Pakistan. I mean, there was no contact with Pakistan for so long because of the extreme political issues. And I mean, it's still got them to a large degree, you know, with what's happened with Imran Khan in recent times, one thing or other. So in fairness to cricket itself, the most politically and economically stable countries have managed better than the developing countries we played cricket during the Sri Lankan Civil War, for instance. They kept going over that long civil war. Even in Muralitharan, as a Tamil, was playing in the side while the war raged. Afghanistan, it's an impossible situation. So we've got to be fair, but there is no doubt, I think, coming back to what we were saying earlier about the distribution of funds, that the game doesn't do enough beyond the boundary in the realms of health and education. And there's no doubt that it could do more within the game itself to ensure a greater stability in the leadership. But in the essence, it all comes back to the stability and the country's preparedness to have a stable administration. So that you can point the finger, but there's got to be greater resourcefulness in many of the constituents of the ICC, greater stability, and certainly less corruption, Jack, I think we can say, without causing too much trouble.
Yeah,
I mean,
whenever there's money and greed involved, that always comes into it.
Corruption is a huge issue in Sri Lanka and a huge issue in Pakistan and India.
As we've noticed over the years, especially certain players, match fixing and all that stuff, which is a very, very sticky sort of topic to discuss. But will it get better, or do you think it will get worse as the years go by, international cricket? Or do you think international cricket as we know it will probably not be here?
No, I think it can prosper, but it can't prosper without decisive and aggressive leadership. Now, the ICC is amongst the most impotent bodies in world sport. And that is a huge issue, and it's been forever thus. I mean, the ICC is nothing other than a collective of its constituent bodies. Now, whether it's time for a radical redrafting of the structure of the game, and that there is some body that is independent of the constituents, or has a representative of each of the constituents, but 2 or 3 independent members are sitting alongside the representative of the constituents. Perhaps that's the way to go. I'm not sure. But clearly, the ICC as it is, I mean, there's always the speculation, well, because of the richness of India, India has the greatest slice of the pie. But India is also contributing a massive amount of money internationally as well as domestically, particularly through the IPL and the television rights for any of its tours. And it's significant that in recent times that the only 5-match test series historically has been between England and Australia. But it has been determined now that the future Border-Gavaskar series, be it in India or in Australia, will be played over 5 test matches. So that is a pointer to the significance of Indian cricket and the worth of the television rights for an Border-Gavaskar series. There's no doubt the devaluation has come about because of the short form. There's no doubt about that. They're playing too much cricket. There's no doubt too much cricket is being played. I defy anybody, even the most passionate cricket people, to keep track of what's happening at every level of the game. It's not possible.
No.
While I accept that it is providing opportunity for more players and for more people around the game, like medical, physiotherapists, psychologists, the rest of it, yes, opportunities are there. But if they're not careful, it was always said after World Series that they're playing too much, they'll kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And really, I think they risk that, particularly in England. I mean, what's the 100 all about? I mean, what does that mean? I mean, if you keep your domestic T20 competition anyway, why the 100? Yeah. I mean, it was Sir Andrew Strauss's thought bubble. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, they're playing too much. What's happening now is that you've got very clearly defined audiences. I don't watch IPL. I might watch part of the BBL. I watch the final, certainly, but I would still watch the traditional game and love Test match cricket. But what you're doing now is, in the old days, they'd say, the number of people who'll come to the one-day game, they'll come across and start to enjoy the 5-day game. It's never happened. Very, very rarely happened. You might have a few that love 50 over cricket, and particularly World Cups. I love World Cups. There's no doubt about that, 50 over World Cups. But the T20 World Cups played every 2 years. What does that mean? I mean, it's not an event. It's just something that's going to pop up every 2 years. I mean, you've got to be able to look forward, like a World Cup over 4 years, and Olympic Games over a period of time when you can think and plan. But, it's, I don't know. Fundamentally, we're playing far too much cricket.
Yeah. I think many people would agree with you there, Mike. But how do you see the future of the 3 formats? Test cricket faces an uncertain future. And as you've spoken about just now, you're passionate about it. So am I. And other people who are listening are passionate about Test cricket because of the history and the traditions that we hold dearly. But that faces problems around the world in some countries that are not performing as well. As you mentioned, the West Indies and also T20 cricket teams like South Africa, for example, when they're touring New Zealand next year, they won't send a full-strength test squad to tour because their South African T20 comp is at the same time and they want their best players there. And many people have said that the way that England have played with Bazball recently, as we saw in the Ashes, Mike, are saying that it's bringing people back to Test cricket, making it entertaining and exciting. No doubt it is. But that can be a little bit misleading if you look at other parts of the world, because it is not prospering. It's not alive and well. It's only alive and well in Australia, India, and England, basically. Other countries lose money when they play Test cricket. So that faces an uncertain future. Then you have one-day cricket, and I think the MCC said in 2027 you'll be gone altogether in terms of bilateral series, and we'll just have World Cups every 4 years. And then T20 cricket is dictating the course of international cricket as we know it now. And, franchises could have multi-year contracts with players, and players will forego their national contract with their country to choose the T20 route, and the franchises will have control over that. Despite people saying it's bad for the game, there's a lot of positives and negatives about T20 cricket, but many people are saying that it's probably not helping the game in certain areas. So how do you see the future of the 3 formats, Mike? Do you think we'll only have 2, 1, or that's how it's going to be for the years to come?
Hard to know, Jack. The key thing with cricket, I think, is, do you remember it? You remember so little about T20 cricket that it defies description. I mean, but perhaps the modern generation, because they pay so little attention to what's gone before, it doesn't matter that they can't remember it. It's just for the moment. They're stimulated. They've got 3 hours of entertainment, and that does them. Perhaps that's the way it's gone. I'm of a school, as you are, that one of the joys is recalling what's happened, talking about the joy of it, and you can recall those moments. And one of the real problems of the amount of cricket's being played now, that too much is lost within this morass. And no one, who was the BBL finalist last year? How many, not a clue. But we can remember perfectly well, a test match series. But I accept that I'm of an old school, and that the young ones coming through, I know a lot of men and women in their 20s and 30s who still love test match cricket. So I hope that there will be enough of them for it to continue. Future formatting is very difficult to know. The 50 over World Cup is, people say, the 50 over has to go because of the success of T20 cricket. But see, T20 cricket is not particularly useful from a television standpoint. It's over so quickly in terms of advertising timeframes and things like that. The World Cup, 50 over World Cup, generates massive amount of money through television rights and advertising. So that's always a plus, even if they don't play much other than the World Cup. But that does generate colossal funds. I don't know, Jack. I really don't. It's changed so dramatically. One of the interesting things you made reference to World Series cricket earlier. We always talked about World Series cricket as being the great revolution, and it was a great revolution. But there have been 2 greater revolutions in many ways. 1983, when India suddenly somehow won the World Cup in England. An astonishing achievement by Kapil Dev. And that changed the mentality of India totally. And they became completely obsessed by the 50 over game. Fast forward to, 2004, I think, 2004, and the first T20 World Cup in South Africa. Or was it later? It was 2007?
It was 2007.
2007. And India left out half their side, including Tendulkar, Lakshman, and I can't remember the other, Dravid, I think. There were 3 or 4 of the absolute guns were left out of the side. And of course, India still managed to win it. And of course, the entire country was then seduced by T20 cricket. So talk about World Series, but, don't forget the revolutions of 83 and 2007, because they've had a bigger and more dramatic effect on the way the game has developed and evolved. So, I don't know where you go from now. And of course, Kumar Sangakkara, who I admire enormously, has over the last 2, 3 or 4 years been playing T10 cricket in the UAE quite successfully. And there's a great push for T10 cricket to be the next step forward. So unless we're seers, clairvoyants, or what, Jack, I've got absolutely no idea. But
I suppose that's the beauty of the future. You just don't know what's going to.
Well,
happen.
Yes, it is, but it's also the fear of the present, because you need responsible decisions to be taken today to ensure some sort of assured future.
maybe it's probably a little bit too late to try and solve those problems. Maybe, I think. Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed hearing Mike and I discuss the state of international cricket.